Dear students, socialization is one of the most important social processes in every human society. Without socialization, the human beings would not be able to participate on group life and develop the human characteristics. The process through which an infant internalizes the values and norms into his self or the made of learning to live in society is called the process of socialization. The important outcome of the socialization is the individual personality. Personality refers to the fairly stable patterns of thought, feeling, and action characteristic of human beings. The core of personality is the self, which is a person's personal identity which he experiences consciously as distinct from other people and things. How does the self is formed in the childhood and how it gets molded throughout life is has intrigued the sociologists, psychologists, and social psychologists. The prominent theories of socialization are formulated by Charles Horton Cooley, George Herbert Mead, and Sigmund Freud. Mead and Cooley emphasized the social side of socialization, whereas Freud stressed the relationship between biological side of humans and their social environment. Cooley, Looking Glass Self. Charles Horton Cooley, August 17, 1864 to May 8, 1929, was an American sociologist and the son of Thomas M. Cooley. He studied and went on to teach economics and sociology at the University of Michigan, and he was a founding member and the 8th president of American Sociological Association. Watching his children at play, Cooley derived some observation about the development of the self. According to Cooley, children learn to get attention by interpreting the reactions of others towards them. They learn easily that disturbing adults' company in the house would focus attention on themselves rather than on visitor. From such insight, children learn to judge themselves in terms of how they imagine others react to them. Here, others are like mirror for the development of self. Cooley terms this way of learning as the looking glass self. It states that a person's self grows out of society's interpersonal interactions and the perception of others. The term refers to people shaping their identity based on perception of others, which leads the people to reinforce other people's perspectives on themselves. People shape themselves based on what other people perceive and confirm other people's opinion of themselves. There are three main components of the looking glass self. First, we imagine how we must appear to others. Second, we imagine the judgment of that appearance. Finally, we develop ourselves through the judgment of others. In hypothesizing the framework for looking glass self, Cooley said, the mind is mental because the human mind is social. In other words, the mind's mental ability is a direct result of human social interaction. Beginning as children, humans begin to define themselves within the context of their socializations. The child learned that the symbol of his or her crying will elicit a response from his or her parents, not only when they are in need of necessities such as food, but also as a symbol to receive their attention. George Herbert Mead described the self as taking the role of the other, the premise for which the self is actualized. Through interaction with others, we begin to develop an identity about who we are as well as empathy for others. An example of the looking self concept is computer technology. Using computer technology, people can create an avatar, a customized symbol that represents the computer user. For example, in the virtual world Second Life, the computer user can create a human-like avatar that reflects the user in regard to race, age, physical makeup, status, and the like. By selecting certain physical characteristics or symbols, the avatar reflects how the creator seeks to be perceived in the virtual world and how the symbols used in the creation of the avatar influence others' action towards the computer user. Mead, Theory of Self. George Herbert Mead was born in South Hadley, Massachusetts. He attended Oberlin College and graduated in 1883 with a BA degree. After working as a grade school teacher and surveyor for a railroad company, he enrolled at the Harvard University in 1887, studying philosophy and sociology. He graduated with a master's degree in 1888. Mead obtained a post at the University of Michigan in 1891, where he met Charles Horton Cooley and John Dewey, both of whom would influence his work greatly. In 1894, Mead moved to the University of Chicago, where he taught until his death. He is regarded as one of the founders of social psychology and the American sociological tradition in general. George Herbert Mead has presented a social psychological theory of relation among the mind, the self, and the society in his theory of socialization. Mead pointed out that our self concept is not equally influenced by all persons, some are important to us than others. These whose judgments are important are called significant others. For an infant, significant others are its mother, father, grandparents, teachers, and playmates. Teenagers rely heavily on their peers, while for the adults, significant others may be from their parents and friends to ministers and employers. Human beings have thinking capacity and language so they can carry on mental conversation. It means mentally indicate something to ourselves and respond internally to it. It is through this facility we can anticipate others' behavior. Through internal conversation, we can imagine the thoughts, emotions, and behavior of others in a given situation. This ability enables human beings to engage in role taking, which is process of mentally guessing the viewpoint of another individual and then responding to oneself from the imaginary viewpoint. According to Mead, the ability for role taking is the result of two-stage process, namely play and game stages. A child in its third or fourth year of age begins to assume the status of individual and acts out the behavior associated with them. A young child can be seen playing the role of mother, father, police officer, cowboy, etc. This imitation or play involves acting and thinking as a child imagines another person would. This is play stage according to Mead, the stage in which children take on the role of individuals one at a time. The second stage is the game stage, which enables children to engage in much more refined role taking. In a game, a child begins to consider the roles of several others at the same time. All the players need to know several rules so as to ensure that the behavior of the participants fits together. All the participants are expected to know what is expected of all others in the game. It is during the game stage that the children learn to adjust their behavior to the group. It is in this stage a child's self-concept, attitudes, beliefs and values and beliefs of one's community and society are formed. The self, according to Mead, is composed of two parts, namely me and I. The me is part of the self formed during the socialization and it is accounts for predictability and conformity. Yet, most of the social behavior is spontaneous and unpredictable. The I constantly encounters me as we conduct ourselves in social situations. The first reaction of self comes from the I, but before we act in the initial impulse, it directed in socially acceptable channels by the me. Thus, I normally takes on me into account before acting. But me does not always control the innovative dimensions of the self. Freud, psychoanalysis. Psychology's most famous figure is also one of the most influential and controversial thinkers of the 20th century. Sigmund Freud's work and theories helped shape our views of childhood, personality, memory, sexuality, and therapy. Other major thinkers have contributed work that grew out Freud's legacy, while others developed new theories out of opposition to his ideas. In 2001, Time magazine referred to Freud as one of the most important thinkers of the last century. A 2006 Newsweek article called him history's most debunked doctor. While his theories have been the subject of considerable controversy and debate, his impact on psychology, therapy, and culture is undeniable. As W. H. Auden wrote in his 1973 poem in memory of Sigmund Freud, if often he was wrong and at times absurd, to us he is no more a person now, but a whole climate of opinion. Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist who founded the discipline of psychoanalysis. Interested in philosophy as a student, Freud later decided to become a neurological researcher in cerebral palsy, aphasia, and microscopic neuroanatomy. Freud went on to develop theories about the unconscious mind and the mechanism of repression and established the field of verbal psychotherapy by creating psychoanalysis, a clinical method for treating psychopathology through dialogue between a patient and psychoanalyst. The most common problems treatable with psychoanalysis include phobias, conversion, compulsion, obsession, anxiety, attacks, depressions, sexual dysfunctions, a wide variety of relationship problems such as dating and marital strife, and a wide variety of character problems, painful shyness, meanness, obnoxiousness, workaholism, hyperseductiveness, hyperemotionality, hyperfastidiousness. The basic tenets of psychoanalysis. The basic tenets of psychoanalysis includes the following. First, human behavior, experience, and cognition are largely determined by irrational drives. Those drives are largely unconscious. Attempts to bring those drives into awareness meet psychological resistance in the form of defense mechanisms. Besides the inherited constitution of personality, one's development is determined by events in early childhood. Conflicts between conscious view of reality and unconsciousness material can result in mental disturbances such as neurosis, neurotic traits, anxiety, depression, etc. The liberation from effects of unconscious material is achieved through bringing this material into the consciousness. Psychoanalysis as treatment. Freudian psychoanalysis refers to a specific type of treatment in which the analysand, the analytical patient, verbalizes thoughts including free associations, fantasies, and dreams from which the analyst induces the unconscious conflicts. This causes the patient symptoms and character problems and interprets them for the patient to create insight for resolution of the problems. The specifics of the analyst's intervention typically include confronting and clarifying the patient's pathological defenses, wishes, and guilt. Through the analysis of conflicts, including those contributing to resistance and those involving transference onto the analysis of distorted reactions, psychoanalytic treatment can hypothesize how patients unconsciously are their own worst enemies, how unconscious symbolic reactions that have been stimulated by experience are causing symptoms. The ID, the ego, superego. Freud hoped to prove that his model was universally valid and thus turned to ancient mythology and contemporary ethnography for comparative material. Freud named his new theory the Oedipus complex after the famous Greek tragedy Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. The Oedipus conflict was described as a state of psychosexual development and awareness. In his later work, Freud proposed that the human psyche could be divided into three parts: ID, ego, and superego. The ID is the completely unconsciousness, impulsive, childlike portion of the psyche that operates on the pleasure principle and is the source of basic impulses and drives. It seeks the immediate pleasure and gratification. The ego acts according to the reality principle, That is, it seeks to please the ideas drive in realistic ways that will benefit in the long term rather than bringing grief. Finally, the superego aims for perfection. It comprises that organized part of the personality structure, mainly but not entirely unconscious, that includes the individual's ego, ideal, spiritual goals, and the psychic agency that criticizes and prohibits his or her drives, fantasies, feelings, and actions. Piaget, cognitive development. Jean Piaget was a French speaking Swiss developmental psychologist and philosopher known for his epistemological studies with children. His theory of cognitive development and epistemological view are together called genetic epistemology. He believed answers for the epistemological questions at his time could be better addressed by looking at their genetic components. This led to his experiments with children and adolescents, in which he explored the thinking and logic process used by children for different ages. Piaget's theory of cognitive development is a comprehensive theory about the nature and development of human intelligence. Piaget believed that reality is a dynamic system of continuous change and as such is defined in reference to the two conditions that define dynamic systems. Specifically, he argued that reality involves transformations and states. Transformations refers to all manners of changes that a thing or a person can undergo. States refers to the conditions or the appearances in which things or persons can be found between transformations. Piaget explains the growth of characteristics and types of thinking as a result of four stages of development. The stages are as follows. The sensor motor stage is the first of the four stages in cognitive development that extends from birth to acquisition of language. In this stage, infants construct an understanding of the world by coordinating experiences with physical actions. In other words, infants gain knowledge of the world from the physical actions they perform. The development of object permanence is one of the most important accomplishments of this age. The pre-operational stage is the second stage of cognitive development. It begins around the end of the second year. During this stage, the child learns to use and represent objects by images, words, and drawings. The child is able to form stable concepts as well as mental reasoning and magical beliefs. The third stage is called concrete operational stage and occurs approximately between the age of 7 to 11 years. In this stage, children develop the appropriate use of logic and are able to think abstractly, make rational judgments and about concrete phenomena, and systematically manipulates symbols related to concrete objects. The final stage is known as the formal operational stage, which is adolescence and into adulthood. Intelligence is demonstrated through logical use of symbols related to abstract concepts. At this point, the person is capable of hypothetical and deductive reasoning. When studying the field of education, Piaget identified two processes, accommodation and assimilation. Assimilation describes how humans perceive and adapt to new information. It is the process of taking one's environment and new information and fitting it into pre-existing cognitive schemas. Accommodation, unlike assimilation, is the process of taking one's environment and new information and altering one's pre-existing schemas in order to fit in the new information. Daniel Levinson, Positive Development. Daniel J. Levinson, an American psychologist, was one of the founders of the field of positive adult development. He was born in New York City on May 28, 1920 and completed his dissertation at the University of California, Berkeley in 1947. In this dissertation, he attempted to develop a way of measuring ethnocentrism. In 1950, he moved to Harvard University From 1966 to 1990, he was a professor of psychology at the Yale University School of Medicine. Levinson's two important books were Seasons of Man's Life and Season of a Woman's Life, which continue to be highly influential works. His multidisciplinary approach is reflected in his work on the life structure theory of adult development. Positive adult development. Positive adult development is one of the four major forms of adult developmental study. The other three are directional changes, stasis, and decline. Positive adult development processes are divided into the following six areas of study. Hierarchical complexity, knowledge, experience, expertise, wisdom, spirituality. Research in this field questions not only whether the development ceases after adolescence, but also the notion popularized by many gerontologists that a decline occurs after late adolescence. Research shows that a positive development does not still occur during the adulthood. Recent studies indicate that such development is useful in predicting things such as individuals' health, life satisfaction, and ability to contribute to society. Now that there is scientific proof that individuals continue to develop as adults, researchers have begun investigating how to foster such development. Rather than just describing as phenomenon the fact that adults continue to develop, researchers are interested in aiding and guiding that development. For educators of adults in formal settings, this has been a priority in many ways already. More recently, researchers have begun to experiment with hypotheses about fostering positive adult development. These methods are used in organizational and educational settings. Some use developmentally designed structured public discourse to address complex public issues. Conclusion. Socialization is a term used by sociologists, social psychologists, anthropologists, political scientists, and educationists to refer to the lifelong process of inheriting and disseminating norms, customs, and ideologies, providing an individual with the skills and habits necessary for participating within his or her own society. Socialization is thus the mean by which social and cultural continuity are attained. Socialization is means by which human infants begin to acquire the skills necessary to perform as a functioning member of their society and is the most influential learning process one can experience. Unlike other living species whose behavior is biologically set, humans need social experience to learn their culture and to survive. Although cultural variability manifests in the actions, customs, and behaviors of whole social groups, the most fundamental expression of culture is found at the individual level. This expression can only occur after an individual has been socialized by his or her parents, family, and extended social networks. Group socialization is the theory that an individual's peer groups rather than parental figures, influences his or her personality and behavior in adulthood. Adolescents spend more time with peers than with parents. Therefore, peer groups have stronger correlation with personality development than parental figures do. For example, twin brothers whose genetic makeup are identical will differ in personality because they have different groups of friends, not necessarily because their parents raised them differently. Gender socialization, Henslin 1999, contends that an important part of socialization is the learning of culturally defined gender roles. P76. Gender socialization refers to the learning of behavior and attitudes considered appropriate for a given sex. Boys learn to be boys and girls learn to be girls. This learning happens by way of many different agents of socialization. The family is certainly important in reinforcing gender roles, but so one's friends, school, work, and the mass media. Gender roles are reinforced through countless subtle and not so subtle ways, said Henslin. Cultural socialization refers to parenting practices that teach children about their racial history or heritage and sometimes is referred to as pride development. Preparation for bias refers to parenting practices focused on preparing children to be aware of and cope with discrimination. Promotion of mistrust refers to parenting practices of socializing children to be wary of people from other races. Egalitarianism refers to socializing children with the belief that all people are equal and should be treated with a common humanity.